this is kind of a video that I've wanted to make for a while because it is a really important topic for me. But I think a lot of people actually go through their life not realizing the damage that is actually being done to them. And a lot of people's problems, whether it's in language learning, which we talk about a lot, or anything really in life, can actually kind of be traced back to school and how it is not particularly good in a lot of ways and is actually largely a waste of time and can sabotage you in your learning. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video. And I basically want this to kind of educate you a little bit on the reality of how things work. So when you lose your purpose is, I think, a really interesting title for this slide. And I don't usually actually talk about the title of the slide, but what I mean when I say lose your purpose is when an institution or anything really kind of loses its purpose, it's very difficult for it to actually be useful. And I think with school, a lot of people don't actually really know what the purpose for it is anymore. Like some might say making friends or memories. Like, sure, those are all great things that happen, but that's not why a multi-billion-dollar government program was created. School wasn't created so that taxpayers could pay for you to make friends or memories. You can do that in many, many other ways. You can do that just meeting people through, proximity, by them being your neighbors, through work, etc., etc. That's not why school exists. The reason school exists is basically to prepare you for life. It's to prepare you to have, a fulfilling and productive and just a good life, good quality of life overall. And I think some people will say, oh, school is to prepare you for the workplace. I think that's close to the truth, but I disagree because I think it's too narrow. It doesn't really take 12 years of generalized subjects to prepare you for the workforce, and even if it did, it's missing a lot of things, which we'll talk about in a second. So I do think the purpose of school is to prepare you for life. I think there's so many important things that need to be taught that aren't being taught, and my opinion is that that is what school should do. It should prepare kids for adult life and teach them everything they actually need. And the problem is that school really needs to teach important life skills, and it currently doesn't do that. And I'll try and rope it back to language learning a bit at the end, because we do talk about language learning a lot. But this video is a lot more than that, and I'll show you in a second. So here is what school should do, in my opinion. As I already said, the purpose should be to prepare kids for life by teaching crucial life skills and self-improvement. And here is basically, I'll give you the quick version of how I think it should be set up. If you haven't been to school in a while, this is disclaimer, I live in Australia, so this is how this is kind of built off how the Australian school system works. But I think most school systems aren't too different, even if you have some places have school split into elementary school, middle school, high school. Like in America, we only have it split into primary school and high school. That kind of stuff isn't really relevant. It's more like what's being actually taught. So if you can't really remember how school works, it basically has core subjects or compulsory subjects that, I don't know what your country calls them, but basically things like English, math, science, things that you have to do all the way through school. And then you might have some subjects like music and physical education that are kind of taught once or twice a week, but not as much. And then you might have electives where when you're in the older grades, you can actually pick some stuff of what you're actually doing. And I'll talk about how school actually works at the moment on the next slide, but that's just kind of a refresher so that we're on the same page. The way I think school should work is core subjects should basically teach the most important life skills. So obviously, I'll start over here with crucial skills, even though it's not first. Crucial skills are things like being able to read, being able to do basic math, time, etc. Those things obviously are taught in the young grades, and they're exceptionally important. They still need to be taught, obviously. I just think the problem is when you carry those core subjects like English, math, through all the way to senior school where you're not actually doing useful things anymore. And I'll debate anyone who disagrees with this, but I don't think learning Shakespeare is particularly important as a mandatory subject in grade 12 when the suicide rate is so high and when obesity rates are so high and when we're not learning about money or social skills or technology or anything that's really actually... I didn't even know really what Medicare was because it wasn't taught in school. And if that's an Australian, medical program, obviously, but things like that just aren't taught. And I think that's really, really naive of people to try and say the school system works currently when they don't teach things like that. Obviously, you don't have to, in Australian, for example, you don't have to do that level of English. You could do a lower level of English, but the problem is that you have to pick one, and the higher level of English where you're doing Shakespeare is actually incentivized through your ATAR and through... They basically condition you to think that that's what the smart kids do, when in reality it's not particularly useful and it could easily be swapped out for other things. I'm basically of the opinion... I'll talk about the actual things on screen in a second, but my opinion is basically everything that's being taught in school should be more useful than everything that isn't being taught in school. Like think about that. that's pretty much common sense. If there's something that's not being taught that's more useful than something that is being taught, they should be swapped until everything that's being taught is more useful than everything that isn't being taught. And I think a lot of the stuff in school currently could very easily be swapped for more useful things. So the three really important core subjects that I think should basically exist all the way through school are health, number one, so learning about physical health, mental health, diet, nutrition, exercise. I think everyone should learn mandatory counseling, first aid, how to actually, basic health stuff that is actually extremely important for people to know so they can actually maintain their own health. Learning how to take care of your joints, learning about the dangers of microplastics and things like that. Things that people kind of have to research in their own time if they actually want to learn about it because they're not being properly taught in school. And someone might say, oh, well, we do PE, which is physical education. We kind of do that. Not really, because you do English 3 times a week in high school where I went, and you learn about things that aren't useful, whereas that's either an elective or it's less done a week or it's just not valued as much. That should be the most valued subject. And until that's done more than any other subject and its curriculum is actually useful, I'm not satisfied yet. And the other two main subjects I think that should be carried all the way through are some kind of social skills class or anthropology, so the study of human beings and how people basically operate. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that, at least something that should be studied in the older grades, is because once you leave school, you kind of realize that the real world doesn't work like school. You're not a special snowflake. People don't really care about you that much. You're kind of just a cog in the workplace machine, and I think a lot of people are really unfulfilled with that, and it's because they've been set up the wrong way. So I do think we should learn about how people work, about psychology, about human behavior, and just basic social skills and that kind of thing. And I think another thing that could be particularly useful is work skills. So teaching about, I've got something covering the bottom of my screen, sorry, so I can't see the second line, but I think just stuff about discipline, about how to actually self-improve and improve as a person, learning basic skills like about money, finance. People are just financially illiterate when they leave school these days, and I think that's really damaging. Things like that. And then also electives. So I think there should be mandatory electives like understanding how people don't even understand how the legal system of their own country works, which I think is really bad. So I think that should be law, and that kind of thing should be mandatory. Same goes for technology. We don't even get taught about AI in school, which is just bonkers because that's basically going to be the next internet. And yeah, that is what I think schools should talk about. Obviously, we could be here for hours, and I haven't really gone in depth in it, but I think those are the important things. And the bottom line of this is that it should prepare you for life by teaching the most important things. It's not important learning about, some high-level physics that is basically mandatory until grade 10, where I come from in school, in my country, doing that kind of unit, which just isn't particularly useful. Learning about Newton's laws, you don't need to learn that. What you do need to learn is actually the dangers of certain things that are actually damaging your health. You need to learn amateur counselling. You need to understand how the legal system works so you can vote properly if there's a problem in your country. You need to understand how money works and how investments and how to actually save for retirement and those kind of things, and they're just not taught at the moment. But yeah, moving on, here is basically what school currently does. And again, disclaimer, I come from Australia. I don't know what your specific school does in your country. This is just what I've been exposed to. It's what I understand, and it's what I understand a lot of people are also exposed to and are going through, and I think it's really damaging. So basically, it teaches an out-of-date curriculum, which I think largely wastes time and doesn't actually provide kids high-value skills. I've already talked about that, but basically a lot of the subjects that are either taught or incentivized, even when they're not mandatory, are not particularly useful. They kind of set you up for university, which is an extremely corrupt system that is designed to make money and profit off of kids that are half of which aren't even 18 when they graduate. And yeah, I think a lot of school actually operates like a daycare, where, I don't know what you call it in your country, but basically daycare is like childcare for kids whose parents are working when they're like 4. I think one of the benefits of school is really that, because if it didn't exist, there would be really no one taking care of all these kids while their parents work, because a lot of people need a 2-parent income to effectively survive. So I will give some credit where it's due. I'm just going to need a drink of water real quick. Some of the pros of schools at the moment are it does teach crucial skills at a young age. If you live in a Western country, the literacy rate is probably like almost 100%. It's probably fairly high. So you do learn to read, write, do basic math, etc. That's well done. I'm not criticizing that. It does also allow students to attempt to specialize in high school in electives. It gives them the opportunity to pick electives that it kind of lets them go into things they enjoy, which I'll say that's an attempt. That's good. It does attempt to provide broad general knowledge, which I think is broad. There are there is kind of a general knowledge component that everyone should leave school knowing, and it does attempt to do that. It does also attempt to teach discipline and learning skills and organisation. And I suppose you could also say it by way of being with a bunch of other kids, it attempts to teach social skills and attempts to give you memories. A lot of those things have the word attempt in front of them because they're not done particularly well, or because it kind of goes case by case depending on how good your school is. But yeah, a lot of the cons of the school system, which I think are they weigh a lot more than the pros, are that the curriculum is not high value. And what I mean by that is curriculum is just the things that are taught. It's some group of people has basically set what you have to learn in school. It's not high value. It doesn't actually contribute towards this purpose that I explained before. The highest value curriculum would contribute to that as much as possible. It currently doesn't do that. Students also graduate without knowing crucial things, as I've already explained. It enforces conformity and punishes individuality. So I think basically what I mean by conformity is that it enforces one strict way of doing things, where you have to sit down, put your hand up if you have a question, and someone might say, oh, you need that. You actually don't, because it depends on what job you're doing after school, but I think it does a lot of damage, particularly when kids are being whacked on behaviour altering drugs, when they, a lot of the time, I don't think should be on them. They just have other issues that can be solved in other ways. I will say intelligence is also measured only in academics, which is seriously bad, because a lot of people will go their entire adult lives thinking they're not particularly smart because they didn't do well in school, when in reality it was only measuring their ability to, write an analytical essay or do this kind of complicated math equation, which has nothing to do with their actual intellectual level, which is completely elsewhere, which is not good. I'm not saying that everyone is equally smart and they're different. That's obviously not the case. Plenty of people are smarter than other people, but the reality is that there's multiple ways to be smarter. And I think if school is giving, how you have like the ducks or whatever you call it, the highest achieving award, if school is giving that to someone who isn't objectively the smartest person, there's obviously some kind of problem with how they're actually measuring people's intelligence and how the whole academic system is going. And the last thing I'll say is that it also gives a very narrow exposure to the real world, partly because all of your role models have gone through basically the same thing in life. They've all gone to university to become teachers, and they're biased in certain ways that are all the same, and you're basically being exposed to people who are quite similar. Obviously, someone might disagree and say, oh, but some teachers are young, some teachers are old, obviously, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not particularly different people. They've all done the same thing, and it's really, really bad to only be exposed to one group of people, and I think what that does is it sets you up with a lot of similar biases. I know it's obviously, I'm not saying it's good that teachers aren't paid particularly well. That's obviously not a good thing, but I think constantly being surrounded by, as an example, people who whinge about their jobs does create a very negative kind of environment in regards to money, and I think a lot of people take that into their adult life in a kind of victim mindset where they're constantly complaining about money and wanting handouts and stuff like that. And this isn't to demonize teachers or anything, but I just think that is one example of something bad that happens because of only being exposed to one group of people that largely do similar things, and I just think that's bad overall. So the result of this is pretty much the backstabbing, which is maybe a little bit of hyperbole, but it basically means you leave school lacking essential life skills without actually having done the things which you should have done to prepare you for an adult life. And it sets you up with very limiting beliefs, such as your intelligence and narrow worldview, etc., and just etc., 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 all of the things I've talked about in this video, which is a little bit grim, but what is actually the solution to all this? And I think there are two things. The first thing is that obviously we need to fix the school system, but that's more long term, so I'm not going to talk about that. The second solution is for you to take responsibility for your own learning. And the interesting thing about this is that most people will leave school and they will never learn anything again. They'll never open a book again for basically the rest of their life. And what that results in is the only learning they've done is kind of the shallow, crappy learning they did in school, which wasn't really learning. So they learn nothing. And I think the truth is that education is lifelong and you're in charge of your education. So don't let something like school, a backstabbing like the education system, actually cripple you and not let you get any further. And I would say to basically take stock of your life and the things you want, and remember that you can achieve them if you do put the work in and you actually learn and become and evolve to be the person that you actually want to be. You're not constrained by the fact that you were told in school you're unintelligent. And yeah, that is basically my opinion on this. Thanks for watching and have a good one.